Partners. It's amazing how life works. Sometimes a day feels like 3 months, but other times weeks fly by without you even really noticing. Tad kept tutoring me. I kept making him use the aerobic equipment, and he kept pushing me for it by forcing me to lift weights. My upper body was sore all the time, and according to Tad, his legs were about to fall off any minute from the strain of pedaling an exercise bike for 3 minutes on the easiest level. But I was actually doing okay in math. Tad was pedaling every day, and one night I noticed that if I flexed it really hard, I was starting to have something that might one day become a bicep muscle. Meanwhile, Tad spent half his time trying to get me together with Lindsay, and the other half complaining about what a love-struck dork I was. The worst was science, because it was the only class besides gym that we all had together. Sitting at our little table was super weird. Every time I talked to Lindsay, Tad just sat there smirking at me. And whenever I wasn't talking to her, I was getting busted by Mr. Lorenzano for not paying attention. Which wasn't really fair. I was totally paying attention to the back of Lindsay's elegant swan-like neck. Anyway, the worst was this one day when we had to pair up for an experiment. Tad made this big show of, "Don't worry about me, kids. I'll just work by myself in the corner. Or maybe Mr. Lorenzano can pair me up with some other lonely, friendless outcast. You just go ahead and have your fun, though." So that's how I became lab partners with Lindsay. Honestly, what would you have done? The experiment was this whole complicated thing where you pushed a toy car down a ramp, timed how long it took to go the distance, tilted the ramp up a little more, and repeated until the ramp couldn't tilt any further. We had only 2 problems. Lindsay kept making wisecracks, and I was so intoxicated with her presence that I kept forgetting to do stuff. Lindsay was the official car pusher, and I was the timer. Before the first run, we were supposed to guess what would happen. She said, "Well, I'm going to assume that gravity works pretty much the same on the East Coast as it does in Cali, so I think the car will roll down the ramp. What do you think? And do these lab goggles make my face look fat?" No. Your face is very, goggle-worthy, and I think you're probably right about the car." She beamed at me. "Wow, I'm goggle-worthy. You sure know the way to a girl's heart. Ready, Dr. Alper?" Then she pushed the car. But I was so distracted that I forgot to push the little button on the timer, so we had to do the whole thing again, which Lindsay found totally hilarious. "Okay," she said. "Are you ready now? Or do we have to send you back to button pushing 101? What's button pushing 101? I was wearing a button-down shirt that day. Lindsay reached out and poked one of the buttons into my chest. "There. That's how you push a button. Any questions?" "Yeah," I thought. "Will you marry me?" But of course all I did was stammer and stutter my way through the rest of the period while my goggles steamed up repeatedly due to nervousness. Meanwhile, across the room, Tad was working with some girl from Guatemala who barely spoke any English. She was probably the perfect partner for him because, from the look on his face, I had a feeling she wouldn't want to know what he was mumbling under his breath every time I looked over there. All in all, it was an interesting class period. I dropped the timer twice. Mr. Lorenzano told me 3 times to focus. Lindsay never stopped smiling at me once, and I learned that gravity works the same everywhere. But it wasn't the only form of attraction in that classroom. On the way out of the room, I said, "Hey, Lindsay, I had fun being your partner." She punched me on the arm and said, "You ain't seen nothing yet." Tad said, "Adios, amigos," and rolled off down the hall alone. During our next workout, I told Tad I thought he was ready to try the treadmill. He refused to even think about it and climbed right onto the bike. The same thing happened every day for a week or so, until one day, when we were about to get on our machines, I finally said, "Tad, you have to practice walking sometime. That's the deal. Otherwise, you're never going to be ready for... Have I ever told you why I stopped walking?" Whoa, shocker. Tad used to walk at least part of every day until partway through 6th grade. Then all of a sudden, he just gave up and started spending all of his time in a wheelchair. At first, the physical therapist would argue with him about it, but eventually he wore her down. But he had never, ever talked about why he'd quit like that. "No, you never have. But you don't have to if you don't want to. No, you should know this. Remember in 6th grade I had the huge screaming fight with Brianna Slack? Oh, I remembered. She was this girl who sometimes sat with us at lunch, until suddenly one day during group work in math, Tad had called her a, quote, dripping, festering human pus factory, end quote, and Zitzilla. Then she had run out of math class crying hysterically. After that, she'd never talked to either of us again. She still went to our school, but it was like we were on totally different planets. How could I forget? Zitzilla, right? He chuckled, but not in a happy way. Yeah, Zitzilla. But you probably don't know what she said to me first. I waited while Tad looked everywhere but at me. Then finally he made eye contact and continued. Jeff, she asked me why I walked funny. I told her about the whole cancer thing. She said, yeah, I know that. And Jeffrey had cancer too, so he limps. But he doesn't make that, scrunchy face when he walks. Plus, you stick out your tongue every time you take a step. How come? So what'd you say? Dude, you have to understand. Brianna was the first girl I ever thought was, well, never mind, it doesn't matter. Brianna, I thought? Tad liked Brianna Slack? That was odd because A, he had never mentioned it, and B, she wasn't that cute. Ouch, I said. Yeah, ouch. So I got a little cranky. Right, and Mount St. Helens sometimes gets a little rumbly. So you said, I said that if my face looked like someone had been firing yellow crayons into it with a rocket launcher, I wouldn't be making fun of how other people walk. I know I overreacted, but I was so mortified. I mean, I knew I limped, but I had no idea I looked so repulsive while I was doing it. So you stopped walking? Yup. Wow, you really showed her. Tad flipped me a gesture that wasn't going to earn him any extra points for etiquette, like Emily Weiler does to Mr. Gillette all the time. Then he got up out of his chair and climbed shakily onto the treadmill. That first time, Tad took 9 steps at 1 mile per hour. It was a start. Soon enough, it was almost time for the dreaded first dance of the year, the Halloween hop. As if anyone under the age of 65 actually knew what a hop was. Plus, dances are always a horror. But when you combine the usual boy-girl part with the additional menace of picking a costume, you got a whole new level of angst. Tad and I were discussing it before science class one day. He was pushing hard for matching Star Wars outfits, him as R2-D2 and me as C-3PO. Or maybe historical figures, with him as President Franklin D. Roosevelt and me as whoever. Basically, as long as Tad got to have wheels, he figured we were all set. Personally, I kind of wanted to do my own thing. I had vague visions of dressing up as Lance Armstrong, the perfect costume for a biking cancer survivor. But then there was the whole shiny shorts thing. You can see the dilemma. Of course, in the middle of the whole scene, Lindsay came in and sat down. Ooh, she said. You're going to the dance? Yep, Tad said. But my date is being a little difficult. Lindsay reached across the table and poked Tad's arm. Who said he's your date? She asked. Oh, man, the shiny shorts were definitely out. So I guess you're going too? I said. Yepers. I gotta see how y'all get down and party on the East Coast. I've got my outfit picked out and everything. I didn't get to hear what she'd be wearing because that's when Mr. Lorenzano came in and started yammering at us. But I wasn't actually tuned in to his channel. All I could think was, yikes. I have a date. I think. At the end of the period, Tad asked Lindsay a question that would have some serious consequences. If my boy here is going to be your date, shouldn't you tell him what you'll be wearing so you can coordinate costumes? Oh, great, I thought. We haven't ever been alone together for more than a minute and we're already going for the matching leisure wear. Lindsay said, You're right, Tad, but I don't want to ruin the mystery completely, so I'll just give you a hint. When you're helping Jeff pick a costume, think Disney.